what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete that random shape that I've just made. The easiest way to learn is by doing, messing up, making amendments, etc. So the first asset that we're going to make is going to be this candle holder. And I'll tell you why once it opens. My computer is a little bit slow. Essentially, it looks complex, but in reality, it's a very simple shape to actually make. So it gives us opportunity to use loop cuts, bevels, extrudes, etc. So the way we import images into Blender, if I come into my folder where my picture is stored, and I click and drag it into the scene, that's it, essentially. So you may be thinking, oh, surely that's going to be hard to model because it's at such a strange angle. You would be correct. So best practice is if you go to a flat side view, so for example, if I click on the green Y in the top right, I get my reference and I drag it in, you will see that it disappears. Wow. It never used to do that, but it does it now, which is upsetting. So if I go back to Y, on the right hand side there is a icon called data, which is like a generic image photograph. You just need to tick the box where it says perspective. So you'll now see that the image is perfectly on the, well, it's visible on the y-axis, but it's actually on the x-axis. And I just need to drag it back a little bit, like so. If it's bugging you that it is not centered, you will see a tiny arrow in your top right that you can click. You just click and drag on location, 0, and then that will center it as best it can. And then just use W to pull it up. So before I start doing modeling, normally my process is I'll start breaking down what shapes I will need. So in reality, this one's really easy. So I'm just analyzing what's in front of me. So this bit is cylinder. On top, we have cylinder. The flame will be sphere. Very easy. When it comes to more complex shapes like guns, it's obviously becomes a bit more complex. But the important bit is that you're breaking down whatever it is that you're trying to model into as many simple shapes as possible. And normally we model things the same way they will be presented in real life. So I wouldn't have 3 different cylinders to kind of make this section. It would just be one. I wouldn't have loads of cylinders for the candle. It would just be one. Same with a gun. The grip would all be one part. Sometimes the grip merges into the trigger guard. So that would all be one shape. It doesn't mean that I have to make all of it from one shape. But I just need to make effort into making it look like it is one shape. So, in object mode, in the top left, so press 4 on your keyboard or just switch it, we can add mesh cylinder, like so. All I want to do to start with is I want to scale it. So if I press R, and middle mouse click will do a uniform scale. So it's really important that you're not clicking on the x-axis and putting it in and be like, oh wow, that looks amazing. Because by the time you get to the end, you'll rotate and be like, oh. So it's important that we do uniform scales. If you are struggling to middle mouse click, you can click on the big white circle and drag that instead. My reference is slightly off, so I'm just going to fix it. So I'm just going to get the width of my candle holder. I'm going to take this top face within edit mode and I'm going to pull it down. And I want to pull it to that first kind of section. So modeling this, it's a semi-flat photo, but in reality we've got this kind of bend at the bottom. So what I would normally do instead, I would just model to one side so I can see that's the bottom, that's the bit where the top ends, and then that's the way that I'll model it, moving up. Okay, so all we're going to do, we are going to extrude, and we are going to pull it out. I'm going to press R. I'm going to suck it in. So the way that you want to approach modeling is essentially you get in the basic shapes first. So it's what's called a block out. Once you've got the block out, we go back through and we start refining things. So add in these little kind of indents. But we do that once the shape has been established. The reason behind this is, if I was to model this really high detail straight off the bat, though we're basing it off a reference image, it might get to the point where you kind of look around your model and you're like, the proportions and scales are a bit off. Which then means instead of you moving just a couple of edges, you've now got loads of little edges where you've used to kind of shape it, and it's just a long, tedious task. So extrude to start with, we're going to pull it up. We're now going to do an inset, because we can tell by this top face, it goes flat, sucks in, and then extrudes again. So if I click on that circle and pull it in, you might notice that it's quite hard to get a decent inset before it starts resizing. So the trick is use middle mouse for pretty much all of it. Click on the scroll wheel, drag. So all I am trying to do is get rough shapes. So once I'm happy, I extrude again. And that's just going to go all the way up to the top. And then I extrude again to the top. So I'm just getting that basic shape locked in. So this bit at the top, we want to do an extrude. So if I go into face mode, click on these faces. So by pressing Alt and X, I can toggle X-ray mode, which means I can see my reference behind it. So I want to click on all these little dots. I don't want the top one. So the issue I spoke about earlier with extruding, we can see that it's not really doing what I want. So if I press Control E, that's going to cycle through the extrudes, or I can just click and hold. The one I want is extrude along normals. So I'm going to go back to the side view and extrude along normals, just to get the thickness. And then we've got our basic candle holder, like so. So if I'm happy, which I am, it looks fine, I probably need to play around with that inside bit. So I'm just going to scale this top face and then extrude it in for that little inset. I'm going to start worrying about adding the additional shapes. So I want the other cylinder, which is going to be the candle. So I add my cylinder, like so. So once I'm happy, I want to start adding in the other shapes that I'm going to be using. So if I go to add cylinder, and I scale it, press W to position it, just kind of get what I want, like so. It's close enough. But like, oh, actually I want it to be a bit fatter, so I select that bottom face, I scale it. Oh, you can see it's starting to mess up. So the reason for this is I've added the cylinder while being in edit mode. So though they are two separate shapes, if we look on the right hand side, this is everything that is inside of my scene. So I've got a camera, I've got a cylinder, got an empty, I've got a light. We can see we've only got one cylinder. So when we are adding new objects, we want to make sure that we cycle back to object mode, add mesh cylinder. And we can now see I've got cylinder and this cylinder 001, which is our new one. So the same tools we just used, just scale, click on that top face, pull it up to be the top of the candle. Lovely. And then we will say that that is our basic candle holder. The proportions look fine in my opinion. So the next thing I want to start doing, I want to start doing another pass on this, which is refining the details that I skipped at the very start. So I'm going to start at the top. no reason for starting at the top. But this is where adding a loop cut comes in very handy. So wherever the profile of this candle changes, I want to add a loop cut. So I need an edge here, I need an edge here, one here, etc. All the way down. And the way that we're going to do this, there's various ways to do the same thing in 3D. But the way that we're going to approach it is we're going to press Alt-C to get our loop tool. We're going to click and hold on a vertical line. I'm going to drag it where it needs to be. I'm going to add another loop cut where the silhouette changes. Press R, middle mouse click, drag to the left. So the issue with eyeballing is you're trying to make perfectly straight edges every time. So for example, this section we can see is straight. So I could do the same thing where I'm just kind of eyeballing, trying to make it straight. Alternatively, I can do a loop cut, drag it all the way to the top, press W, and then pull it down on the blue. And now I know that that's straight. I'm going to go to the next one. So loop cut, resize, middle mouse, all the way up, W, pull it down. Loop cut, resize, like so. So I'm just starting to kind of, it's still blocky-ish, but we're going to go back through and do bevels afterwards. So if we were to look at this shape, it's not a perfect boom. It kind of sucks in a little bit. So to do this, we do a loop cut, and then we just suck it in a bit. So I'm just going to do one loop cut for now. So you may be wondering, all right, if I want to resize this, I have to go around, select it all one by one. It's not the case. If you go into edge mode, so 2 on your keyboard, double click, you will select the entire ring, and then again, you can just scale it. Like so. So now it's a case of just kind of working through the entire model to match the reference.